Which was the fastest growing European economy in the past 4 years? Well, number 1 is Poland, but who would have guessed number 2 as Greece? To the north, the once mighty German economy is struggling to avoid recession. To the east, Turkey has inflation of around 70%. The UK's GDP per capita is still lower than in 2019. Yet the IMF forecasts that for 2024, the Greek economy will significantly outperform the Eurozone. This will be on the back of a surge in investment and EU recovery funds. So what, if anything, can the UK learn from Greece's strong economic recovery? But first, before we place the Greek economy on a pedestal, we do need to be cautious about the use of economic statistics. Because the dark truth is that Greece is recovering from an economic disaster, kind of unprecedented in Western Europe in the post-war period. The Greek debt crisis saw GDP fall 18% and unemployment to soar to 25%. To put this into context, in the Great Depression, UK GDP only fell 5%. Even now, the Greek economy is still well below the 2008 peak. If 20% of your economy shuts down, you would expect to see much faster growth as you recover, and this explains some, although not all, of Greece's recovery. In fact, the first lesson the UK really needs to learn from Greece is the potential dangers and pitfalls of a single currency, especially when your economy diverges from the rest of Europe. Now, the new Labour government made encouraging signs of greater cooperation with Europe, but the idea of rejoining the European Union and in theory having to join the Euro seems an impossible step for the UK. In the early years of the Euro, southern countries like Greece, Spain and Portugal all seemed to get a lot of benefits from the Euro without any drawbacks. Bond yields converged as credit rating agencies, incorrectly as it turned out, believed that debt was safe in any currency denominated in the euro. This proved to be a false optimism. Not only that, but the euro allowed wild imbalances to occur, and nowhere was this greater than in the case of Greece. The Greek economy had never really industrialised, and consumer goods were mostly imported. The Greek current account deficit reached 15% of GDP. In 2008, by contrast, in the UK we worried about a current account deficit of 3% of GDP. But the real problem of the euro was the next stage. The global recession of 2008 led to a slump in economic growth, a fall in tax revenues and even higher debt. EU creditors demanded to be paid back, but the Greek economy was broke. Debt was over 140% of GDP. The economy was deeply uncompetitive. Now, it was in a way a similar story in the UK. Budget deficit was high, and the UK economy was really hard hit by the financial crisis because we relied so much on the finance sector. One difference, though, was that in the UK, the pound devalued 30% in response to this impact on the economy. And this fall in sterling helped to boost competitiveness and increase domestic demand, at least relatively. But in the euro, of course, the Greece couldn't devalue at all. Secondly, the UK retained its own monetary policy. Interest rates were slashed to zero, and the bank began quantitative easing, which kind of made borrowing cheaper. UK bond yields fell, but in Greece, bond yields rose to close to 40%. But it got worse, because Greece was told by the European Union, its main creditors, that it must pursue austerity. Now, this isn't austerity light like the UK, but this is a devastating cut to government spending, higher taxes, all trying to reduce debt. It was a perfect storm for economic disaster. Overvalued exchange rate, high interest rates, high taxes and falling government spending. There was no relief at all. Basically, the Greek economy was told to restore competitiveness through a massive recession and fall in wages. The austerity measures were so severe, they caused a vicious cycle of falling output and falling tax revenues. By contrast, the UK austerity was relatively mild, although entirely self-inflicted. Nobody told us to do it. In terms of austerity, Greece was off the charts, but it has proved a cautionary tale about the dangers of a single currency when there's a lack of geographical mobility and economic integration. Now, if Greece was a cautionary tale about the single currency, you could say the UK made its own contribution to the European project by making Euroscepticism more unpopular, because by 2016 there was a rise in Euroscepticism, in part caused by the devastating impact of the euro debt crisis. But Brexit in 2016 and the political and economic difficulties in subsequent years went some way to making the idea of leaving the European Union less attractive. There was a sharp reversal in attitudes to Europe. Now, ironically, after all the EU encouraged austerity of the 2010s, which was very damaging, Greece has been a major beneficiary of recent EU COVID recovery funds. Since 2021, Greece has received nearly 15 billion euros in grants and loans from the EU, equivalent to about 8% of GDP. This has been enthusiastically taken up by the Greek economy and made a real difference to get the economy going again. And Greece's partial recovery has encouraged investment from multinationals like Pfizer and Microsoft. Greece investment, started by higher public investment and then encouraging private, has boomed from 10 to 15% of GDP. And this has been a big factor in the economic recovery. But again, it's important to point out that 10% investment was incredibly low, a reflection of the economic crisis Greece felt itself in. So yes, it's good it's recovered, but it's still low by European and global standards. However, the encouraging thing is that the EU does seem to have learnt at least some lessons from the Greek experience. The ECB, of course, became more flexible about liquidity in the bond markets. And the pandemic recovery funds has really helped, especially economies like Greece and Italy, make some recovery. Now, the new UK government keep telling us that they want more economic growth, but at the same time remain rather timid about fiscal rules. And the Greek experience does show that the best way to reduce debt to GDP is not just about austerity, but more investment as well. From the depths of the 2015 crisis, Greek debt has actually begun to fall, and the credit rating has gone from junk status to investment grade. Now, an interesting contrast between the two countries is the issue of work. The UK, big interest in the 4-day working week. The campaign for a 4-day week claims that 92% of firms who tried it said it had some positive implications. Greece, by contrast, has just passed a new law that gives firms the right in certain sectors to make workers do a 6-day week. It's hard to imagine that coming in here. In fact, Greece has the longest working week of any European country. Yet is a long working week really something to aim for? A problem for both economies has been poor productivity. UK's productivity growth very poor since 2010, despite full employment, and Greek productivity is amongst the lowest in Europe. Real economic growth and prosperity comes from capital investment, better education, which helps to improve labour productivity, not necessarily work longer hours, but be more productive. Also, whilst Greeks may work longer hours, this is only part of the story, because another problem shared to some extent by the UK is that despite recent improvements, Greek unemployment is still well above the European average. The UK's own problem with people not working, although unemployment is quite low. Now, in the UK, we worry about spending too much on pensions, which actually is only 5% of GDP. Compare that to Greece, where it's 16%. So that's a big contrast between the two countries. The Greek economic recovery is really encouraging, and it shows that even if economies reach a desperate level, that they can recover. There is a lot of flexibility. Also, it shows the euro and the EU in a slightly better light than at least 10 years ago, where Greece suffered so much. However, to really understand all the implications and causes of that Greek debt crisis, this video looks at it in more detail. It's really good, so do check it out. Thank you.